Salamun alaikum. I am El Moses, and I want to talk about the Quran not allowing males to hit females. Now, my take on what the Quran says is entirely inspired and derived from the Quran itself. So there is a good chance that what I'm going to say in the next few pages will not be information that you would have heard of before if all you have been doing is following either the traditional Islamic discourse or possibly those anti-Muslim channels, websites, articles, etc. They seem to love playing against the dominant view. Right. So what is the evidence that these people claim by which they suggest that the Quran and Islam, by extension, is a faith that allows for men to be able to beat women? So the ayah or the verse that comes up all the time is a very famous one, 434. So this is chapter 4, Surah Nisa, and the verse number is 34. This is the verse in front of you. And in this verse, the writer of the book says, الرجال قوامون على النساء. So the way it has been translated, and I have got 2 to 3 translations underneath, so I'll actually scroll down so you can see how that part that I just read out in Arabic has been translated. So all of them, pretty much, including a women translator from Iran, who most would call quite liberal, they've all gone for men are supporters of wives, in the case of Lala Bakhtiar, or in case of Muhammad Asad, men shall take full care of women. Yusuf Ali says men are the protectors and maintainers of women. But the other bit that I would like to draw your eyes towards is this word, this fi'l, this verb called daraba. And it comes here in the form wadribuhun and daraba them. Daraba them as the females. So that has been translated by Muhammad Asad as beat them, has been translated by Lala Bakhtiar as go away from them, and by Yusuf Ali as beat them, but then in brackets he adds lightly to try and take away some of the sting from it. So I hold and I suggest that there are 3 premises on which this entire story is sustained, created, both by the traditional Muslim account and the anti-Muslim ones, that allows people to take away the view that the Quran allows men to hit the women. So it's all based on 3 premises. Number 1, Rijal. So the word Rijal is men. Second, Nisa, that word means women. The third is that daraba, that word, that fi'l, means to physically hit. So what I propose to do as part of today's exercise is to very simply take us through a very brief journey of how these words are used within the Quran, so we can understand a more broader understanding of what the Quran means when it uses these words within its own. The Quran uses the term bayna yadayhi, between its 2 hands. So how does this book use these words in other ayat, in other verses, in order for us to derive a more nuanced understanding of how this word is used in the same book by the same author across a variety of spectrums. But what I did do before we began was to break this ayah up, both in the Arabic form and in the English form, just to give an idea of what the argument is that is being made. So as you can see on the right-hand side, we've got the Arabic words, and what I have done is I've highlighted in yellow all the key bits. Well, there are 2 key things to take away from here. Number 1, the points that I've highlighted, they all need to be really thought through by anybody who reads the Quran. But secondly, what I've done is I've broken down the argument of the Quran, so it's not just one line, and that doesn't give you the conditions, the scenario, the premises behind whatever it is that this ayah is saying. So if we leave the one on the right-hand side, because I'll speak about the Arabic later, on the left, I'm not translating those particular terms because we're going to look at them. But for now, let's look at the argument. The argument that this ayah makes is as such. The Rijal, which we'll define, are qawwamun, which we'll talk about, upon the Nisa. Now there are 2 reasons that this verse gives. Because, number 1, God gave some of them an advantage over others. And the second reason is because they spend of their wealth. So now that it has been established that a certain class of people because the Quran ultimately is a book for people, have been given responsibility of qawamun upon another segment of the society because they have got two benefits or two reasons for their status. And number one is God has given them an advantage, and number two, because they spend from what they have upon the other segment of the society. Now, that's going to be very important once we come back to this and we try and fill out the variables for what Rijal and Nisa mean per the Quran. So what we'll also do is we'll go and look at this bit there. So this is the bit where the word daraba comes. So God says, and those Nisa whose resistance you fear, admonish them, abandon them, and daraba them. So this daraba, again, just as a reminder, is the fi'l, is the verb that has been translated as physically hit. Now that you can see how the argument is laid out in the Quran, we will now proceed and start looking at these terms in their own right. So the first term that we're going to have a look at is Rijal. So does Rijal, per the Quran, really does mean a man, or does it mean something else? So the first verse I have is from Surah Baqarah. So it's the second surah of the Quran, and the ayah is 239. This ayah is coming before that particular we showed you, in which they say Quran allows men to hit women. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that word has come before in the Quran, so as to set an idea for us as to how to derive meaning for that word. So the writer of the Quran says, فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ, and if you are scared, فَرِجَالًا أَوْ رُكْبَانًا, then walking or in movement, أَوْ رُكْبَانًا, or while you are in movement as in you are riding something. So Rijal here is being used not as a verb, but as either a state of being or as a person who's doing it in a certain stature. So if you are scared, then do whatever is being talked about in the state of being a Rijal. Let's continue on. Surah 7, ayah number 46. In that, God says, وَبَيْنَهُمَا حِجَابٌ وَعَلَى الْأَعْرَافِ رِجَالٌ يَعْرِفُونَ كُلًّا بِسِيمَاهُمْ. So here God says, and between them there is a partition. This is being talked about the people of the Jannah, people of the paradise. And about them, God says, وَعَلَى الْأَعْرَافِ, and upon the heights, the great places, places of bliss, places of respect, رِجَالٌ يَعْرِفُونَ, on those great heights are sitting Rijal. They know everyone. يَعْرِفُونَ كُلًّا بِسِيمَاهُمْ, they know everyone by their mark. So it's quite important to note here, I am emphasizing quite a bit on the word Rijal here. Why? Because if we were to take the meaning of Rijal here as men alone, well, is the writer of this book, who we say is God, really not aware that women exist? Or does he not even care about them? And because he doesn't care about them, he doesn't mention them here. Why didn't he say, وَعَلَى الْأَعْرَافِ رِجَالٌ وَنِسَاءٌ, or in English, and upon those heights are men and women? No, he did not say that. He said rijalun. And if we are insisting, as we do in our traditional discourse, that rijal only means men, then what God here is saying, per that logic, is that upon those heights, on the day in Jannah, in the paradise, will only be men, no women, only men. Okay, so let's proceed. This is chapter 9, verse 108. Now the context very quickly is about a place for prostration, a masjid, a place where people go to submit to God. Now God says, fihi, in that masjid, rijalun, are rijal, yuhibbuna, they love, and yatatahharu, they love that they cleanse. Right? So again, let me emphasize the same point that I made before, which is, if we are to say that Rijal only ever means one thing, and that is men, then we have a problem here, which is that God seems to forget that places of worship are meant not just for one gender or not just for one sex, But that is exactly what we are finding out here. That is exactly how it's being translated. And if you read this translation below, and I will highlight that, it does say, in it are men, fihi rijalu, and they are the ones who love to cleanse themselves or somebody else. And God also loves those who cleanse themselves. So in other words, women, 51% of the whole world, as far as this ayah is concerned, well, they don't matter, right? Okay, let us proceed and see where that leaves us. I think by just looking at those 3-4 verses, by looking at or applying the logic of exclusion. So if the premise was that the word Rijal means men, then on each ayah of the Quran, wherever that word is used, it should also mean men. But if we can find just one example, and I've given you 3 examples just before, if we find any one example that does not allow for men to work, then something about that meaning is wrong. And what that wrong is, we'll talk about when we come back to Rijal. But let's continue on and look at the second premise. And the second premise, as I was saying, based both upon by the traditional account and those who don't like the Quran, is that Nisa throughout the book are women. But is that right? And just as we did before, we will begin by looking at the Quran, a few ayats in which this very same word has been utilized to get an idea of how it's been used. So, chapter 3, verse 14. And again, this chapter also comes before this particular ayah we were looking at, in which apparently God is telling men to go and hit women if they don't listen to them. So God says, Zuyyina lin-nas, and has been made pretty for lin-nas. Now, nas, anybody who speaks Urdu, anybody who speaks Hindi, anybody who speaks Arabic, the language of this book, knows that nas means people. It does not mean a group of men. It does not mean a group of boys. It does not mean a group of old dudes. No, it means people. When I say people, it contains all segments of society. So it contains men and women and old people of both genders. It even includes those people who in today's world do not call themselves men or women, or who might be men but also prefer men. So Nas is everybody. Now that we have talked about that part, let's continue. So the ayah says, Zuyyina lin-nas, and has been made pretty for that people. Hubbu shahawat, love of desires, minan nisa, such as women or from women. Now, that obviously is the meaning that I'm taking as per the translations, and all of them say that. So there are a few more things as well, like children and gold and silver, and we can argue that, okay, people, whether they are men or women or whatever their orientation, they do want livestock in fields and gold, as in money, etc. But this bit there, women, are we really saying that the writer of this book, which is God, really only suggests or thinks that all the people, this is unless all the people, they love the desire from the women? Okay, well, the reader of the Quran, myself as a man, I'm okay with that. And, I do prefer women. So when I read this is fine. But what about my wife? What about my daughter? When I teach her the Quran, when she reads this particular ayah, what meaning is she meant to take away from this? That God either forgot her, that God did not add her in this part here, the nas, and so this whole ayah does not even apply to her, or if she is part of that group, unnas, then God is saying that she is going to have desires for nisa, for women. I hope you can see some of the problems that we already are encountering by insisting on nisa to mean women. Let's continue on to another verse that probably deserves a whole section in its own right, but we'll just talk about the bit that we're interested in for now. And so this ayah goes, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ, and if you are scared, أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى, that you cannot be just between, they say, the orphans. I would argue it means anybody who's needed. فَانْكِحُوا, then engage with them. Now the translations say marry, but this bit is the interesting bit. مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. I'll stop there and read this part again. ما طاب لكم من النساء. So let's break that down word by word. فانكحوا. Now whether you say it means engage with them or make contracts with them or marry them, that's part's irrelevant. Ma, whatever, or who, طاب. Now this verb here is third person masculine. I'll repeat that. طاب. Now in Arabic, even the verb, so whoever is doing an action, by the verb you can tell whether it's a man or it's a female, whether it's a group of people that are men, there's a group of people who are women, whether it's us, etc. So we have got those markings clearly written out. So it says here, Ma taba, whoever wants. Now that wants, that word taba is third person masculine. Lakum, for you, minan nisa. So what this verse is saying is, from the nisa, so that is the women, as per we understand, per our traditional discourse, whichever from the nisa want, you may marry them or you may engage with them. So the problem, and this is quite a crucial point, and I may not be able to explain that well for those who don't understand a bit of Arabic in the Quran, but the point is quite clear, which is that God seems to be saying that the Nisa, which is a collection of females as per that account, the verb that he uses for that collection is not a feminine verb. He uses taba and not tabat. So taba means it should be applied or being referred. It should be referring to a group of men or a group of men plus women. But here, if the word is a nisa and that is meant to be only a group of females, then ma taba, that is a grammatical mistake. And this is indeed a point that has been made by those who attack the Quran based upon linguistics. And they say the form of the word that should have been here is ma tabat lakum minan nisa. So whichever of the nisa like you or prefer, or that it is missing some other words, but that would be a different discussion. So point being, an-nisa, a collection of females, well then that verb form here is wrong. Let's continue on to our third ayah. And this is quite an interesting one. And again, it probably requires a whole discussion in its own right. But we'll just focus on the Nisa part. So this ayah says, وَاللَّاتِي يَأْتِينَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مِن نِسَائِكُمْ. And those Nisa, so if Nisa is being translated as women, so those women who come with fahisha, with lewdness, with terrible things, then there's a host of things that can happen to them. But if you keep reading them again, the literal translation, I would say this is quite harsh. So it goes, so if they have done lewdness, the female Nisa, right, is how we are being forced to understand. Then if the females, the women, if they do fahisha and they come, then you should go and get 4 witnesses against them and then confine them to the homes until death claims them or something else happens. But yeah, if death happens while they're being put up in their homes, that's fine. So the problem that comes up here is a matter of justice. I looked at the verses before and after, and guess what I did not find? I did not find a corresponding verse here that would have talked about God mentioning a similar punishment for the Rijal. So if Nisa are women, and if Nisa, as in women, do fahisha or bad things, then they are being given a very harsh punishment. But guess what? That punishment seems to only apply for women because there's no ayah before or after with the same wordings that appears for Rijal, if we say Rijal are just men. So, well, we've got power politics happening here. We've got a writer of the book, as per the argument goes, who does not really seem to care much for women. Let's proceed. Okay, one more ayah, and we'll go to our third premise. وَلَن تَسْتَطِيعُوا أَن تَعْدِلُوا بَيْنَ النِّسَاءِ. And the writer of the book says, and you will never be able to do justice between the nisa, as per they say, between the women, وَلَوْ حَرَصْتُمْ, even if you tried, even if you wanted to do that. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is that we have got other verses of the Quran in which we are told to do justice and make sure that we're being just, we are being honorable. This ayah says, even if you tried, you couldn't do it. So now you've got a conflict happening. How can the same Quran order us on one point to do adl, expecting us to be able to do so. But now it seems to be saying, even if you tried, you can't do it. So we've got an ayah whose interpretations are quite creative if we are to stick to the traditional account of the book as a book that can only be understood by applying terms like men and female that were, well, I would, as I'm saying, do not really mean that per the discourse. So this premise, just by proving the exceptions, I hold that Nisa in the book does not always mean women in this book. Now, I'm being very careful so far in what I'm saying. I'm not saying Nisa does not mean women in Arabic that we speak today. I'm not even saying it does not mean Nisa in the Arabic that was being spoken in the time of the Prophet. I'm not saying allegedly. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is in this book, the writer of this book does not seem to use these words by the meanings that we use for them today. And that is quite an interesting discovery and something that we should respect as academics or as simple readers of any book of literature. So third premise, does daraba, so this is a term that's been translated as hitting physically, as we saw in the beginning, does it actually mean to hit something physically? So again, as we have been saying before, we'll start with the first chapter. So even before we come to that ayah, in which apparently this ayah comes for hitting women, we've got at least two examples by God in which he uses the same word without any extra prepositions before or after to give us the meaning of that action. What is that action? So first ayah, God says, Inna Allah, and surely God, la yastahyi, is not ashamed, or is not that he doesn't mind, and yadriba mathalan, that he strikes an example. So yadriba here is coming in the sense of striking an example, making an example, presenting an example, showing an example, giving an example. So that word, daraba, is the same verb that we saw in 434 in the very beginning. Right. The next ayah, 261. Now I'll skip all of this bit and I'll come right to this part. So these people, for whatever they were doing, they deserved what? وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ الزِّلَّةُ وَالْمَسْكَنَةُ, and was struck upon them, humiliation and poverty. So whatever those people did, and not the point of our topic, they had this action happen, duribat. So what did that do? Did that mean some people came, started hitting them, started beating them? No. Duribat alayhim, and struck upon them was an abstract zillah, was an abstract humiliation, and poverty. So I don't quite see how anybody at this point would say that no, we have to take this daraba here as they were physically struck by blows of humiliation. Another ayah, Surah Nisa, so same ayah in which the other ayah sits, but here the verb is used in a different meaning. So God says, وَإِذَا دَرَبْتُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, and when you strike in the earth, or in the way this has been translated, when you travel in the land. وَإِذَا دَرَبْتُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, and when you go and do daraba to the earth. So again, we're not physically hitting. Well, you could probably argue that when you walk on earth, you do physically hit it. But it is quite obvious, I would say, this is not what the meaning of this ayah here is. And even if you were not a Muslim, if you were just a reader of the book and you read that, you would take that meaning here to be metaphorical. That here, the author, whether it's God or not, it seems to be suggesting that here the intent, the order is that people should go and travel in the earth. Last two more ayahs we'll have a quick look at. تؤتي أكلها كل حين بإذن ربها ويضرب الله الأمثال. Again, God strikes examples, linnas, for people. Again, it's quite interesting that whenever God seems to be talking about examples, and this is something that came up in the book when I was looking up this word and its collocations, but yadrib or daraba comes quite a lot with these abstract concepts like amthal. So here God is saying, when God strikes examples for mankind, and in the similar sense, the same form is used in which Surah 43, God says, أَفَنَضْرِبُ عَنْكُمْ الذِّكْرَ سَفْحًا, will or shall we hold back from them the dhikr, the reminder. So again, nadrib, well, the writer, again, I'm saying we could take away God from it. The writer seems to be saying, if we are to go by the literal meaning, then, well, shall we hold back the beating from you? Well, I don't quite think how that works. So applying the principle of exceptions prove a rule right or wrong. So we can take an exception, and if it ends up breaking the general universal rule that was given to us, then we can safely say that daraba in the book, in the Quran, does not always mean to physically hit something. To summarize, Rijal in the book does not have to mean men. Nisa does not always mean women. Daraba does not always mean physically hit. So we'll now come back to 434, the Quranic ayah. And now that we've got some idea based upon what the Quran says, and I have gone through this before. So everywhere the word rajul or rijal comes and when nisa come, I could have gone through and shown all of those examples, all of those ayahs, hundreds of ayahs. But in interest of time, and anybody who's interested, academically intrigued, I'm sure they would want to do their own research anyway. But based upon looking at all of those ayah, the only meaning I can legitimately derive is al-rijal are people who are given authority or power. They are qawamun, they are responsible upon the nisa. So nisa are the ones who are being looked after, those who are under care, those who are weak, those who are disadvantaged. And daraba is in the sense of giving an example, setting an example, dealing in a way as to drive a change in their behavior. الرجال قوامون على النساء. So ones given authority power are responsible upon the looked after ones or those who are under care. بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض, because God gave some of them an advantage over others. وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم, and because of what they spent of their wealth. فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله. So the good weak ones, so the good nisa, are obedient to God, and they guard the unseen or whatever God keeps safe. وَاللَّاتِي تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهُنَّ, and as for those weak ones, so those ones under your care, whose resistance you fear, فَعِذُوهُنَّ, then admonish them. وَهْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ, and abandon or leave them in their places, stations. وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ, and strike for them an example. فَإِنْ أَطَعْنَكُمْ, and if they obeyed you, فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا, then do not find a way against them. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا, truly God has been lofty, great.